Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. I want to take a second and just make sure that the sound is okay and that the picture is okay. And just let me know if there's any kind of anything stopping anything. Let's see here. Okay, I'm just going to take a second and look at a couple things. I don't see anyone in the... Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So is the sound okay? As everybody can hear? So far sound, but okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. I wanted to talk to you about something I was studying earlier. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did a study on a little bit of the Zadok history. Now, the Zadok priesthood, for those of you that don't remember, we have Levi, who started the priesthood, or through Jacob, the Levitical priesthood, which is in the Old Testament. And it got narrowed in the time of Moses and Aaron. So the priesthood, or the high priesthood, has to go through a descendant of Aaron. Later on in time, it got narrowed again, and it had to go through Zadok. So they had to be Zadok priests. So from that time all the way down to when the apostasy hit in the 1st and 2nd century BC, and the Zadok priests were run out, executed, that kind of thing, and fake priests took over. And we've been studying the apostasy of that. But one thing I thought was interesting is we do remember that there was an apostasy and an expulsion to Babylon. So I thought it would be interesting to back up to that to see if we have any clues on exactly what may have happened. And of course, the main place for that would be Ezekiel Chapter 8. So I want to go ahead and look at that. And I did notice a few really interesting things. So remember from our studies in the last couple of months, the Habakkuk commentary and some of the others, Nahum commentary, talked about how the Sadducees developed around, and they may have been earlier, but at least around 280 BC, with around the time of Alexander the Great and one of his generals. They actually requested one of the generals come to Jerusalem to kind of take over. And so this is an interesting idea. If the people don't like you and you're about to be ousted, to ask a foreign power to come in to make sure you stay in power. Now, it wasn't like in the 1st century where you've got Sadducees and Pharisees fighting, and they both asked Rome to step in to stop the fighting so that they could restore some sort of order. And maybe that was just a ploy anyway. But that's what's going on in the 1st century. 280 BC, they just wanted it stopped. So we don't care how many of our citizens you have to kill, just make sure we stay in power. And that was a horrible, horrible thing to say. And the judgment against them was that the sword would never leave their house. And of course it didn't. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were destroyed as a ruling class in that 1st century BC, or AD rather. So what's interesting though, if we go back to Ezekiel, there's going to be several things that we see. So let me just flip over to that. We'll look at eSword, and hopefully this looks good to you too. I'm trying several things to make everything super clear. So anyway, Ezekiel, this is going to be Ezekiel. They've been taken captive in the first 7 chapters. And then he has this vision, and the Lord shows him what's going on in Jerusalem and what the judgment is coming and why. So he says, in the 6th year, it came to pass, in the 6th month, the 5th day of the month, I sat in my house, and the elders of Judah sat before me, that the hand of the Lord fell upon me. So first, let's look at this. This is the 6th year in exile, okay? So that part we don't care a whole lot about. But the 6th month, the 5th day of the month. So the 6th month, of course, would be the month right before Tishrei. 5th day of the month. I don't know of anything specific on that date. But let's take a look at the calendar just to make sure. So if we go back to here. Wrong button. Okay. So let's go to here, look at the calendar. And so first month, second, third, fourth, and fifth is Av. Now the third would be the first fruits of new wine. And he said it was the fifth day of the month. So basically it was Tuesday, according to their calendar, 2 days after the first fruits of new wine. I think that might be kind of significant. So let's go back here. So this is going on. The Lord comes to him and he says, I beheld and lo, a likeness as the appearance of fire. And the appearance of his loins downward were like fire, and from his loins even upward, the appearance of brightness, like the color of amber. Now this is interesting. I don't know if it means anything or not, but this word for amber in Hebrew, if you're talking about a color, which it does say color of amber, here anyway, the color of amber is what we think of, just the color of amber. But the word itself has a secondary meaning, and it means lightning. And they knew about static electricity because everyone way back when would see, lightning strikes, forest fires. So the color of amber and or lightning, or that kind of light shining off of him. He put forth the form of a hand and took me by the lock of my head, and the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and heaven and brought me to the visions of God to Jerusalem. I think that's interesting. Somebody just grabbed him by the locks of his head, by his hair. So he goes to Jerusalem. Now, this is a vision he's seeing. To the door of the inner gate that looks toward the north. Now, this may have been different than a lot of pictures that we see, but just focus on what we're talking about. So there's the temple. There's in the temple, there's a outer gate and an inner gate, and they have different doors on them, or entrances or exits, gates, in other words. So on the inner wall and the outer wall, we're talking about the one to the north. And exactly where it was, we don't care at this point, but we're going to see why it's kind of important here in a second. So the inner gate to the north. So that'll be the first one. So there's an inner gate to the north and an outer gate to the north. The inner gate to the north, there was the seat of the image of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy. Now, I've talked to a lot of rabbis and a lot of other things. I just would like to know, is this a statue of Baal or Asherah or some other god, phallic symbol, it's a basic idea of what we're talking about. Obviously, there should be no idols of any kind in the temple. So what was this? No one seems to know exactly. But let's go on, because I think we can pinpoint a couple of interesting things to it. So, behold, the glory of God, the God of Israel, was there, according to the vision I saw in the plan. He said to me, Son of man, lift up thine eyes, and now toward the north. So I lifted up my eyes the way toward the north, and behold, the northern gate of the altar was the image of jealousy in the entry. So whether he's like basically around the temple, he's looking north, and at the inner gate, there's that idol of jealousy. He's going to continue looking forward, and something is going to be at the outer northern gate. And I'm assuming those are connected. So that's our clue in this case. So he sees the image of jealousy at the northern gate, inner part. Furthermore, he says to me, Son of man, see what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary. But turn yet again, and you will see greater abominations. So this is something that will make God leave. This is something horrible, in his opinion, an idol, a large one in the inner sanctuary. But now we go to the second part. So he says, he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, there was a hole in the wall. And he said to me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I had digged in the wall, behold, there was a door. So this could all be symbolic of what's going on, or it could be literal, or it could be both. But basically, they have secret things that they do, and they cover up the entrances so that no one can find them, hopefully. And he finds this and goes through the door. And he said to me, go in and behold the wicked abominations that they do there. So I want you to look at this. This is pretty interesting. So I went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping things, and sometimes that's translated reptiles or bugs or things like that. We know reptiles and other bugs actually were basically everything was worshipped in Egypt. So, and then abominable beasts, all the idols of the house of Israel. So think about this. There's creeping things and abominable beasts. So it's two different things, and all the idols of Israel. So Israel had different kinds of idols than those normally, but they have everything here in this chamber. And it was all portrayed on the wall round about. Now look at this. This is pretty interesting. And there stood before them, these idols, 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel. Now stop there just for a minute, because this is pretty interesting. The word here for ancient is zaken, so it just means old, ancient, depends on how it's used. Much like when, and this is part of a riddle, much like when we say baptism in the New Testament, we're usually talking about water baptism. But remember when Jesus said to the disciples, can you be baptized of the baptism that I have to undergo? He's obviously talking about his death on the cross. So sometimes words are used differently. But if we were to look those up, it's still baptizo, okay, which is the Greek word for baptism or immersion. So the words are the same, but there's different meanings. So it's interesting. The word for elder is different than an ancient or someone that's old. And so it's interesting to me here that the King James translators decided to say ancients rather than elders. Well, elders would be incorrect, but old people. And think about this. You have a priesthood. There's no way that the regular priesthood has a beginning of life. Around 20, you start training, but you can't actually be a high priest until you're 30. And then there's a mandatory retirement at 50 or 60, something like that. So there's no way that you're going to have the entire congregation of elders of the priests that are all like 50, 60, or 80 and on up. So they're not a bunch of old guys. So you could say elders, but that's a different word. So the fact that they use the term ancients, I think, is very significant, because in all the stuff that we've been looking at, that's what the Zadok priests call themselves compared to the others, because they go by the ancient testaments of the patriarchs. Reason why I put that name in the book. We'll see that over and over again. The ancients follow the ancient ways, which is the Old Testament plus the patriarchal writings, whereas the Pharisees follow the Old Testament and the oral Torah. And the Sadducees, the scribes rather, follow just the Old Testament, don't look at any other history and take wild guesses on what they think it means. So very interesting in all that. So 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel. So these were Zadok priests, but these particular group had apostatized. In the midst of them stood Jahza, the son of Saphan, and with every man his censer in his hand, and a cloud of thick incense went up. So they're doing a ritual of some sort with these abominable beasts, creeping things, and the idols that they have. So he said to me, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients, there it is again, of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagery. So think about this for a minute. We know that the Dead Sea Scrolls teach that idolatry proper is someone that bows in front of a little idol or a big idol, some sort of statue. They bow down to it, they pray to it. That's perfect idolatry. That's what we normally think. But the Dead Sea Scrolls say that even if you don't have an idol, like a statue or a picture or anything like that, your theology can become an idol. So they called the sons of darkness and the seekers of smooth things, which are the Pharisees and the Sadducees, idolaters. And there is no way on this planet that any of those would actually have an idol. I mean, like a real idol, not in that day anyway. And so the whole concept was that you have the Old Testament prophecies about Messiah. You have the patriarchal histories all pointing to the Messiah. It's extremely clear what it is and how the apostasy develops. You can either follow directions or not. And if you choose to not follow directions, especially if you choose to be part of the party that kills the Messiah, there is absolutely no excuse at all. So in this case, these idols are chambers of their imagery. So in some sense, you've got actual idols like the creeping things and the abominable beasts, but then you've got the idols of the house of Israel, which in this case is going to be an apostasy. And an apostasy might lead into pure idolatry or fornication or uncleanness or all sorts of stuff, but it's a departure from proper doctrine. Now, you don't have to worry about accidentally being an idolater. Let me just say that. The concept is, we all know about the moral issues, and they're very clear. Don't fornicate, don't steal, don't murder, the basic stuff. Just don't do those things. It may be hard for you to struggle with a sin, but you know what the sin is. It's not hard to understand. The other stuff, though, like, did Jesus mean this when he said that? Is there going to be a pre-trib rapture, post-trib rapture? Those things we speculate on, and you can't be part of an apostasy by exploring different ideas. The problem comes in when you take a stand and you say my way or the highway on a non-moral issue. And that's when we divide amongst ourselves and we forsake the one great commandment, as John said, which is to love one another. So with this in mind, there's going to be some sort of a doctrinal divide that is their idolatry. So let's see here. Notice what it says. So it's they do in the chambers of their imagery, the imagination of their mind. So this is what they say. Look at this. They say, the Lord sees us not. The Lord has forsaken the earth. Now, I've read this many times before, and I've thought, well, the Lord doesn't care, whatever. He's forsaken us. Maybe like, mommy and daddy doesn't love me anymore, boo-hoo. But that's not what we're talking about. Remember that the Sadducee heresy is that God, basically, we would call it deism. The Sadducees said that God doesn't punish and he doesn't reward. There's no life after death, either in hell or in heaven. Once you're dead, you're dead. God is off doing his own thing. He could care less. He doesn't do anything in the affairs of men. That was basic Sadducee doctrine, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So now here are these guys saying, the Lord sees us not. Now the word for sees us could be actually looking at you, or sees or agrees with what you're doing. And from a deist standpoint, he wouldn't see to anything. He wouldn't try to stop you. He wouldn't try to reward you. He doesn't care. The Lord has forsaken the earth. Now think about that. They're still in the land of Israel. Actually, they're not at this point. But the whole idea that the Lord has forsaken the entire earth, he's walked away from it, that's Essene, or not Essene doctrine, but that's Sadducee doctrine. Deism, basically. And I thought that was really interesting. So the concept here, I think, the takeaway from this is that even the Essenes, the proper Zadok priest, began to apostatize, and it starts with this weird concept, deism. God has forsaken the earth. Now, let me stop for a minute, and we'll read the rest of this, and we'll see, I think, something really interesting. But let's suppose for a minute that you're a Christian, and you brought up in the church, so you understand all the doctrines, you believe all the doctrines, but somebody convinces you, and I don't know how this would happen, but somebody convinces you that even though Jesus died on the cross to forgive us our sins and grant us eternal life and this kind of stuff, Jesus and God the Father changed their mind. They've said, forget it, we're not doing this anymore. They've walked away. So now there's not going to be an eternal hell or a heaven. When you die, you're dead. So if you actually started believing that, not that the religion of Christianity and Judaism is fake, it's all real, but God changed his mind. Okay? So if you thought of that, then there's no way that you can do anything to save yourself or grant yourself eternal life. And if God's not going to do this, is there any other place, looking at Scripture, any other being, any other way that you might grant yourself eternal life? Or somebody else might? Well, think about that. We go back to the whole concept of the Nephilim creations in Genesis chapter 6. So if it has anything to do with that, you might forsake God and try to go the Nephilim route for eternal life. Now, with that in mind, according to Enoch and some of the other scrolls, the fallen angels taught lots of stuff, genetic changes to create, I'm sure, an advanced race. You're not going to try to create an inferior race. So think about this. If you've seen giants and it looks like that they were unstoppable, hard to kill, much harder than we are, smarter, faster, bigger, stronger, maybe they have eternal life too. Maybe their lifespans were longer than ours. So this might all be looking at that. One of the records talks about how the Dead Sea Scrolls were kept by Shem and Eber in the yeshiva, passed down to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. And then Jacob's son Levi, when he entered the priesthood, the records or copies of all the records were given from Eber, because Shem had died by that time, were given by Eber to Levi. So the Levitical priests then have all of these records. Well, so does the school of Eber at this point. After Eber's death, the entire place was taken over by the Amorites. Now we see in the text that the Amorites all of a sudden changed their religion a little bit and started calling their high priest Adonizedek. Now Melchizedek is king righteous, or righteous king. Adonizedek would actually mean the same thing. It's the Lord of righteousness, or the Lord, that kind of thing. So it seems like they've got the scrolls. They're kind of doing their own thing, their own apostasy, because they're changing the story, doing stuff. Then all of a sudden, in a few years later, or a few decades rather, all of a sudden you have giants in the land of Canaan. Now, there is a manuscript in the Dead Sea Scrolls called the Book of Giants, and it tells you briefly, not enough that you could really recreate it, but gives you the understanding of how to create Nephilim, how to do the genetic tampering with what they had back then. You don't need test tubes and all this other kind of stuff, computers and stuff like that, to mix species. You just have to do it just right. So we have a fragment of it. So it's enough to let us know this is how it was done. The records would have had the entire story, I'm sure. So what we see is that the Amorites are coming in. They're anti-God of Israel, but they believe the stories. And they're using what the scrolls say on how to create a master race. Very interesting. We remember the idea of creating a master race in Nazi Germany. So things like that. So it's still around. Any kind of genetic tampering, any kind of cure you might get that alters your genes, you might want to be wary of. So with that in mind, it was also interesting in these same ideas, the Gnostic schools, briefly again, I'll just say this real brief, but the school of the prophets was run by the Zadok priests all the way down, according to Hippolytus, down to the time of John the Baptist, and somewhere along the line it passed to Agabus and then to others. Well, John the Baptist, when he died, his school fragmented. Some of them followed Messiah, Jesus. Others thought maybe John would raise from the dead. I think that's even mentioned in the New Testament, but lots of different theories. And there was one guy who was a Samaritan who was a student of John that had left because he got bored with prophecy because he didn't want to wait. He went down to Egypt to study with the Egyptian Essenes and study occultic magic. He learns a handful of tricks. He comes back to Israel to get followers, realizing that the prophecies are fulfilled, the Messiah has come and gone, now there's the new covenant and this kind of stuff. And we see in the book of Acts, Peter saying, may your money perish with you in hell. But anyway, he goes back to the school of the prophets that John had, some of John's old students, and tries to pull them together. And, when you don't accept the Messiah, you'd accept pretty much anything. So a lot of them begin to follow him, and that's how the first Gnostic school began with the remnant. And Simon Magus's school eventually broke into 22 different, at least 22, but 22 major factions of Gnosticism. I bring all this up because one of the students, a guy by the name of Carpocrates, started what's called the Carpocratian Gnostics. And the church fathers will list all 22 schools, and they'll basically say, here is what Gnostics believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But then each school has something odd or peculiar that none of the other schools teach. And so that's what we name them by, And so one of the things Carpocrates said, I thought it was really interesting, is that we're trapped in this endless cycle of reincarnation that he's going to lead us out of. And he says that he actually was one of those creator angels mentioned in Genesis 6. And so it's a twisting of the story. According to his theology, he actually believes the Bible. It's just that he's on the other side. So yes, they were real. Yes, we are real. And in a sense, if you think about demonic, he might have not even been lying. He probably was possessed by a demon from that time period. So anyway, so this story keeps going around. The idea that we believe the Old Testament, we just don't like God and we're siding with the other guy. Not that you think that Christianity is a bunch of myths. It's exactly right, but we want to be on the other side. So if was this in case, and we'll come back to this now. So he went there, he looked at the inner court toward the north and saw the image of jealousy, of which these people put up, because in the chambers of their mind, they said, the Lord doesn't see what we do, and the Lord has forsaken the earth. So again, if the Lord has forsaken everything, the only chance we have for immortality is to do genetic experiments, that kind of thing. So this image of jealousy probably is connected with that, or Nephilim type things. Now, with that in mind, let's go forward to the next one and we'll see something pretty interesting. So this is what they do. He said to me, turn ye again, you shall see greater abominations than these. So he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. Now, the inner gate toward the north, image of jealousy. This is the outer gate toward the north. They're both north gates. So most likely what's going on here is connected. Okay. So he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, which is toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. And he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again and you'll see even greater abominations. So let's stop here for a minute. So women weeping for Tammuz. A lot of people haven't figured out exactly what that is. In the Samaritan culture, the story is, and the stories always get garbled, okay? The story is that there was this guy named Tammuz, or in their language, Damuzi, who was I think he was a shepherd. Anyway, just a normal working guy. But he falls in love with a goddess, okay? And she likes him too, so they're going to get married or have a relationship or whatever. But this god is jealous because he wants the goddess. So this god kills Damuzi and sends him to hell. And that's basically the thing. And so the ritual is that you weep for Tammuz in this. And they make little cakes, which are actually crescent moon looking cakes. And that's about all we know of that. But the interesting thing about it, I did a book, Ancient Post-Flood History, and in the section of trying to find a little more ancient history, pre-flood history, I was looking at the fact that according to the Bible, there are 10 rulers, Adam to Noah, and then there's a flood. So these are the 10 pre-flood patriarchs. Well, in a lot of the old stuff, like the Chinese, the Samaritan, the Egyptian, all of them have a record of a pre-flood world. In all of those records, there are 10 pre-flood rulers, and then there's a flood. So the interesting thing about it is in the Samaritan record, the sixth ruler is Dumuzi or Tammuz. Now, in the biblical record, the sixth ruler is Jared, Enoch's father. Now, the book of Jubilees says it was in the days of Jared that the angels descended, which is the story in Genesis 6, although Jubilees gives a lot more details. So the point is, and people have always said, why in the world would the Israelis, for centuries, have a month called Tammuz in their calendar, knowing that it's a pagan thing? Well, to them, it's not pagan. It's named after Jared, Enoch's dad. So, and I don't know the story. Maybe they don't even remember the story anymore for this. But it perverts into this weeping. Now, I don't think Jared did anything wrong. I don't think he fell in love with a Nephilim or anything like that. But it's this kind of a thing. Understanding if you're on the other side and you're looking at this history, you could say, well, Enoch was the greatest prophet. He turned from the right path. And his dad, loved a giantess and blah, blah, blah. So it's going to be some sort of weird turn like this. I just thought that was interesting. So that's Tammuz. And we see this. There's a lot of other examples. Like people talk about Nimrod and Semiramis and things like that in Babylonia. And they try to connect things like Osiris and Isis and Horus to that. In the religious ideals of the pagans, they did connect things from all over and come up with a totally garbled story of history, made it into a religion. So some of them probably worshipped all that and said they were the same person. But for instance, the book of Jasher tells us that Ra and Osiris were Egyptian kings before pharaohs were even thought of. Back in the days of Abraham knew both of them. Met them or talked with them when he went down to Egypt. So they're just kings. We know Zeus and Hera and Hercules were actually people, died and are buried. Zeus is buried in Crete. The church fathers made a big deal of the Greek gods because it's a great witnessing tool. You worship Zeus, who's ruling in the heavens, and yet you guys know he's buried over there, and every year there's a great pilgrimage over there. Well, yeah. So how is he there and there at the same time? Yeah, don't ask questions like that. Yeah, but we serve a risen Savior. And so Venus was actually a queen on the island of Cyprus. And there's a lot of things like this. And the church fathers would mark where they're buried. So Hercules is buried in Cadiz, Spain. Things like that. So and I don't know if you can find these anymore, but back in the day, 2,000 years ago, people knew those things because they worshiped them. And it's really good. It's like if you're part of a cult today and you say, we're the real one. Well, why did your cult leader, the guy that started your group, how did he end up in prison and getting killed? Well, it was religious persecution. Are you sure? The records say a few different things, and you bring out these things to witness to people. And that's what they did. So anyway, let's finish up our study here. So that's Tammuz. Now, we'll see greater things. Now look at this. He brought me to the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar. Remember, that's where Zechariah was slain. Between the porch and the altar, there were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, their faces toward the east, and they worshiped the sun toward the east. Now, this is interesting because this again tells us it's a Zadok priesthood because the calendar is all based on the sun. and you would observe the sun, especially even in the temple, every morning to see when the equinoxes are to get the calendar straight. These guys turned even proper doctrine, like a calendar, into paganism. And it's interesting because the prophecy in Jubilees and a couple of the other scrolls is that eventually they would corrupt the calendar. These guys apparently are beginning to corrupt the calendar. But later on, they switched the calendar out for a solar calendar to a lunar one. And that's where the Pharisee or the modern Jewish calendar comes from when that happened. And we have the entire story of how that happened also. But it's interesting here. So you've got an image of jealousy in the same area of the women weeping for Tammuz, all connected to Nephilim type thought. And the concept that God has forsaken the earth. He's not going to help you. So once you're dead, you're dead. The only way you could get eternal life would be by doing something else. And then they begin to pervert those rituals. Now, it ends by saying, he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a light thing for the house of Judah that they commit these abominations that they commit here? And the answer would be no, it's not a light thing. For they have filled the land with violence. They have returned to provoke me to anger. And lo, they have put the branch to their nose, which is an idiom. Therefore, I will deal with great fury. My eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And go through and cry me out. Okay, so anyway, this is what I wanted to show you, but I thought this was interesting altogether. They're the ancients, so they're still Zadok priests, which they would have been. They're still doing the proper things, but they're beginning to apostatize. The main thing in here I thought was really interesting is the idea, what they say, that the Lord has forsaken the earth. That becomes standard Sadducee doctrine. So the Zadok priests in the 1st century AD or in 1st century BC would say that the Pharisees and Sadducees apostatized because the Sadducees would have said this. Now, the Pharisees would have agreed with all of us saying there is life after death, so we need to follow the Lord. But they got off on a different path, doing something they thought would follow the Lord, but it wouldn't. So anyway, I just wanted to bring this up to you. I thought it was interesting. Again, never thinking about going back to the problem that caused the Babylonian captivity, but it is the same priesthood, or basically, and how that would happen. So we'll go ahead and stop there for our study. And let's see here. And again, Av, Elul, in the spring, we have the month of Tammuz. Again, Jared, Enoch's father. Okay, and today is May 10th. So this is right here. So this is, this is our Monday night study. So we're doing this. So this would be the 25th of ER. So one thing to note, mid-spring was the 17th, last Sunday, not last Sunday, which would be yesterday, but a week or so back. Mid-spring, the 17th of the second month is when the flood occurred. It's very interesting. Lots of interesting things on these calendars. Okay, let me go back in the chat room and we'll just see if there's any questions. Oh, everybody's saying everything's 100% good. No glitches or audio and video is good. Israel's under heavy rocket fire. I heard that they were being warned by Hamas something, but I haven't really looked at it. So we definitely need to keep Israel in prayer. Remember, somewhere along the line, or this happens all the time, and to us it's beginning to be happening again. But if you're kind of, and think about this a minute, if you're kind of annoyed with the fact that every 5 minutes there's a report about Israel being bombed, that kind of a thing, think how the Israelites, or the Israelis rather, feel about it. It's not a report. It's every 5 minutes we're being bombed. So just think about that. Again, eventually, Hamas gets guided missiles that hit their targets. And at that point, it can't be allowed to continue. So what you're going to see is them take southern Lebanon, according to the prophecies, and they'll have to keep it. So all of those things happen. We have the destruction of Damascus, colonization of the Negev, and several other things happening. Chris says quality is much better, so great. Yeah, last time we had a really good quality, but I kept glitching. And I went ahead and replaced the Cat 5 cable with Cat 6 and took out a switch that was in between the two. I just got longer cable. So now there's no switch and better cabling between the router and the broadcast PC. Hopefully that will help. Seems like it does. Okay, question. Joel 2. Could this chapter be discussing the return of Christ with his saints, especially verse 11? Let's take a look at it and see. I think I've always looked at Joel 2 as being specifically talking about the tribulation period, so it's in that area. So let me find it here. Joel chapter 2. Where am I at? I'm going backwards here. Verse 11. And the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is great, he is strong and executes his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide by it? Very well could be, because then it talks about the return of the Lord. But all these things are, that would be toward the second coming, I think you're saying. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it definitely could be. It's either got to be talking about that or the Lord sending destruction, and that would be from his angels or something like that. But his army, it would have to be angels or us. So yeah, it definitely looks like it's second coming. It's a good point. Okay, this is a bit off topic, but Goliath, what are his measurements in the Dead Sea Scrolls? I saw a video today that stated the Dead Sea Scrolls never said he was a giant. Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls have typos in them occasionally. Well, I'm not sure the reference, or I'd look it up for you. But yeah, according to, I'll have to go back and look it up. But according to our Bible, he was about 9 foot tall. And according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, they knock, I think, a whole cubit out of there, a cubit or two. So it makes him a little over 6 foot. And I've heard people say that compared to an average Israeli back then, they somehow think that Israelis were 5 foot something. A 6'5" guy would be like a giant. Be a good sized warrior, but wouldn't be considered a giant. And it doesn't match, though, because the whole idea, if he's a 6'5" warrior, he's still not going to be able to pick up a spear the size and the weight that it was according to the Bible. So in the Bible, you have a height and a weight that's kind of proportionate. In other words, if you run that height way down to a 6 foot tall guy and the weight down proportionally, it'd be the same weight of a spear that you would use that would work well. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in that particular one, they have the height down, but the weight of the spear is the same. So you can tell it's basically just a typo. It's kind of like in Enoch, it talks about one of the giants, or the giants, getting to the size of 300 ells, which would probably be like a cubit. So you're talking like 40, 50 feet high, or 300 feet, no, cubit, 300, be like 450 feet tall is what that would be, something like that. That's got to be a typo, so they were giants, of course, but not like that. That comes up every so often, but yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls at that particular point have a different, lower height for Goliath. Yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that God changes his mind constantly. Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, that's spooky. It's nice to know that the Lord doesn't change. Call it new light. Okay, yeah. And only their governing body can interpret the new light. Yeah. Diane says, please don't forget to hit the like button. And then Troy asks, doesn't the Jewish calendar, let me flip this around so it's easier to see. Doesn't the Jewish calendar have a month named after Tammuz? What's all about that? In case you missed it, what we were talking about, yes, it does. It starts off with Nisan, or it was called Abib anciently. And then it's Iyar, which was anciently called Ziph. We only have 4 of the ancient names. And then Sivan, and then Tammuz, which is the summer month. And so what we were saying is Tammuz is the god worshipped, like what we're talking there is the god Dumuzi, or the guy that wanted to marry the goddess Dumuzi in Samaritan religion. But in their records, Tammuz was the 6th ruler of the pre-flood patriarchs. And so that would be Jared, Enoch's father. So they're not naming a month after a pagan god. They're naming it after an ancestor because of a certain story, which we may not know what that is. But basically, this is another name for Jared, Enoch's dad. And it was in his days that the Watchers came. And so there's a lot of interesting history with that. History really began to change in his days. He didn't have anything to do with it, but it was in his days that it happened. So anyway, this is a good example of pagans taking real events and real people, changing the story, mixing things around, creating a religion out of it, and then actually doing something with it. And so we need to ignore the paganism, but not ignore the history. And that's why we have a lot of people today that says they don't want to like have a Christmas tree because it's connected with Tammuz and all this stuff. Well, it may be in some pagan religion, but we don't want to have to mess with anything like that. So if you participate in a pagan ritual, that's a sin. But if you avoid something that's good because a pagan twisted it, that's giving credence to the pagan idea that it may be correct. And that's anciently supposed to be something that you don't do either. So good question, though. And let's see. Lena gave Super Chat at $25. Thank you for all the research and the hard work and creating the Thursday night community. Well, thank you, and I really appreciate all the help and support and the questions. Or Monday. Well, we got Monday and Tuesdays both, but yeah. Oh, nice. Silvertip says they found a new fellowship in Stonewall, which is awesome. It's a Calvary-style teaching, old-fashioned worship, blessed to find. 27 people there, including my wife and I. Yeah, that's the same. I love our church, our Pastor Rick, and he's on his YouTube channel Monday through Friday mornings doing Bible for breakfast. Just a real quick 15-minute type thing. And then Sunday mornings, of course, this church service are on. So you guys are welcome to attend that way if you're too far away. But it's the same thing. We have probably 100 people, more or less, and never really have grown because people like the teaching or people want to have their ears tickled. So one of those things. I'm happy that you found a really good fellowship. That's fantastic. Okay, let's see here. I was given a Bible 2 weeks ago without a publication date. Title is The Holy Bible from the Ancient Eastern Manuscripts. Is it possible that you might know when that was done? Peshitta manuscript. Okay. Well, if it's actually the Peshitta, that would be pretty cool. Ancient Eastern scripts, it might be. There's one translation that says it's that, and it's really all messed up. I forget who did it. It wasn't a cult or anything, but it was just. But then there are other things. There's some really good Peshitta Bibles. For instance, let me bring that up just for everybody else that's interested. We have our it's for New Testament. So for a New Testament, we have like for New Testament anyway. We have the Murdoch translation. This is eSword, and you can go to the download section and download all these different Bibles. There's the free ones and then the paid ones. So there you can get all these Bibles. Let's see if I can do this here. No, not that way. And let's try this. There we go. That's a little easier to see. Well, kind of. Anyway, so you can get all these different Bibles, all these different commentaries, dictionaries, devotions, graphics, like maps, and then reference books like the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and a whole bunch of, and all these are free, and then the others are paid. So there's a lot of stuff that's free that way. So anyway, in here, this is, I don't know if you can see it, but this is the Murdoch translation. Oh, we're still in Joel. Let me flip over to, I didn't hit a 1 or something. There we go. So anyway, the Murdoch translation is actually the Peshitta put in English. So if you're interested in the Syriac, and the difference is the New Testament was written in Greek, and then it was early translated into different languages. There's the Old Latin, there's the Georgian, there's the Coptic, the two upper and lower Coptic, and then there's the Syriac, which is Aramaic, and that became kind of a standard for a long time for Hebrew, Aramaic type speaking people. And so the Peshitta is talked about a lot by the church fathers. So it's nice to do that. You could get like here's my Apostolic Bible Polyglot. This would be the Septuagint version, keyed to Strong's. If you just want a normal Septuagint version, Brenton's is good, but Brenton's is just the Old Testament. Apostolic Bible Polyglot, you can get it keyed to Strong's or normal, either one. But that would be the Septuagint. Then, of course, my King James, my literal, and then Murdoch, the Syriac. And then you can also get an English version of like the Old Latin, the Georgian, those kind of things. And the Coptic is pretty interesting. They're almost identical. And of course, not surprisingly, TR based, not critical text based. But it's good that way. So that one might be, I don't know if I can actually, let me see if I can copy. I guess I can't copy that. But it might be George Lamsa's book. Let me see if we can find out something like that. Yeah, it looks like his is the same. Holy Bible from the Ancient Eastern text Aramaic. So that would be a Peshitta translation. So it's probably George Lamsa. A lot of people don't like George Lamsa, and I don't think anybody really knows Murdoch, like if he was a great guy or heretical or whatever. But I would use definitely Murdoch on the eSword, and this would be kind of interesting to look at too. I've went through a lot of it, and there are just once in a while a verse or two that has an extra something. I mean, more than normal TR based. So that's probably that. I think he did that 1933. That's what this says, is when he actually, I'm not sure he's alive anymore. But good question. In his service, donated $5. So thank you very much. All the effort that goes into it. Thank you. Okay, we're going to have to go check this out. Temple Mount is on fire. Not sure how it started. That would be interesting. There's not too many things on the Temple Mount that can burn, other than that one thing. Okay, well, we'll go check it out and see what's going on. Well, I guess a rocket can hit and explode, and the fuel from the rocket as a fire for a while on concrete or stone, I guess it is. Okay, let's see here. Oh, this is interesting. Reuters is reporting warning sirens have been and are sounding for the people running to bomb shelters. Okay, so this might be something kind of important. Yeah, Christy says the book of Ezekiel's got so much stuff to chew on. Yeah, and the interesting thing to me is I probably read that, 10, 20 times, it seems like. Apparently not this last year since I've been doing the scrolls. And then looking at it, ancients popped out, and then God's no longer with us, and then all that other stuff just kind of popped out at you. So the scrolls and the calendar really help. Dolores donated $5. Thank you very much for all the donations. Oh, good question. Any possibility that you know of a continued presence of Zadok priests continuing privately behind the scenes somewhere? I'm sure there is. One of the things that the scrolls talk about is at the end times, right before the establishment of the kingdom, it's going to be kind of a bad time, and people will be hunting the Jews or priests or whatever, but they would be taken care of by guardians, which is a spiritual gift. I don't think any of us have, but Zadok priests had it back at the time. So the thing that interests me is if we had them before, and apparently we're going to have them then, apparently they've been all the way through. It's like people saying the gifts stopped for Christians. Well, we all agree we had them in the first century. If the church fathers say they end at the rapture, or they're still around at the rapture or that time, so if they are there in both places, they've been here all along. So that's pretty straightforward. So yeah, I believe, it's just my opinion, but I believe there's a group of Zadok priests or a scene somewhere, somebody running the school of the prophets, the real one. And I would almost guarantee they have a copy of all the books complete. So we're out digging in the dirt trying to find copies of everything. So, but we're getting there. I do know that there's some Jewish groups that have certain books that won't release them because they don't think Messiah has come yet, and they contain certain prophecies. And so I understand their sentiment, but we just need to help them to understand Messiah has come. Ooh, Scott says the Alaska moss was on fire. Okay. Well, the interesting thing about that is, and this is the stupidity of the whole thing, Israel gets threatened, unless you do something, we're going to open fire. They open fire and they bomb their own mosque. It's just, obviously Israel doesn't like launch missiles to attack themselves. So they're not going to fire missiles like that. So it's just amazing. Let's see here. Troy Robinson said, tell Pastor Rick I also change my car oil every 10,000 miles, whether it needs it or not. There was a joke he made Sunday at church. Yeah, I'll mention that to him. Okay, it looks like people of Rishon, which is a few miles from Tel Aviv, are in bomb shelters. Okay, yeah, definitely want to pray for them. Amir has been posting pictures. It wasn't the mosque, it was a big tree. Well, we'll see. Either way, something interesting is going on. Thank you for bringing the prophecies to life and helping understand the signs of the times. You're welcome. We're going to continue to do this because I'm learning a lot too, just from the scrolls. But now I'm going back looking at the New Testament and the Old Testament, and lots of interesting things are popping up. Listening to Remnant Radio before, and they were talking about the NAR and spirit mapping. Never heard of that before. I have not heard, at least I don't remember hearing about spirit mapping. But if it's connected with the NAR, it's got to be bad. The NAR is the New Apostolic Reformation. And if it really was that, that'd be cool. But it's basically led by, can I just say, false prophets? People that are in error. And it's not my opinion. Just compare what they teach to Scripture. That's not to say that every single person that's got anything to do with the movement is bad. There's always good and bad people in a movement, but the basic concept of the NAR is not good. I'll have to look up spirit mapping and see what it is. Okay, I think I know what's going on. Someone says, I only see, well, he's talking to someone. He only sees one or two other people in the chat room. I am probably broadcasting to both of my YouTube channels, and you probably picked up on the first thing and grabbed it. But here in the, well, let me just show you. How can I do this here? Here's the, oh, it starts at the end. Anyway, Restream gives me all of them put together. So if I had Facebook and YouTube and other stuff, so that's probably what's going on. I'll have to go look at those pictures later. Yeah, still be seen in the main channel. Yeah, let me turn this off so we can see what we're doing. Okay. TV7 Jerusalem has live streams in a loop. So, okay, that's a good place to go check it out then. Okay. Okay, so yeah, that's what it is. I happen to have, I'm testing this out because we were really blurry the other day, so I'm trying different things, and I think I got everything done right. Part of the problem might have been the cable and or the switch, and part of it might have been a setting, and there's a couple of other things. But it seems like we got it now. No one has said that we've glitched, so I'll have to watch this later and see if I have any kind of a problem. Okay, and we're caught up there, so I'll just read it off of here. This is pretty good. This is a good way of doing it, too. It seems like this is... Actually, I'm looking at Chris McKinley's comment. Let me put his up here the other way, and we'll just kind of see. They both look pretty good as far as easy to read. That might actually work out a little better. Okay, did you say that guardians will be helping God's people through the tribulation? That's so cool. It sounds like the Left Behind series. Are they connected with the 144 Jewish evangelists? I doubt it. It seems like they're few and far between. But a guardian, according to the scrolls, is someone that has what we would call the gifts of tongues and prophecy. You remember how Elijah had the ability to know what the enemy's doing in the enemy attack plans that they're right now discussing in the bedchamber. And he would be able to tell the king what they're planning right now. He just knows, almost like by telepathy. And then if he understands everybody, even though that king may speak a foreign language and not speak any Hebrew at all, he could still understand what he's trying to do and he could talk to him in his own language, hence the tongues. So the idea of putting those together would create a guardian. And I thought that was interesting because Paul talks about the two gifts, tongues and prophecy, and tongues are nice, but pray that you have prophecy. The understanding is much more important. But you can see how this would work. Say like I'm having a church service in my home and it's completely illegal. And if I'm a guardian, well, I happen to know that there's going to be a raid on my house at exactly 10:35 is when they're going to show up. So we'll get together, we'll sing some songs, we'll get in cars, and we'll all go down the street to Perkins, and we'll have some breakfast or whatever. And then at exactly a half hour or an hour later, we'll come back to my house where the policemen have been scratching their heads trying to figure out where'd they go, and they left. And then we'll finish our church service, and we'll all go home. And every time they try to attack, I'll just be somewhere else. Somebody like that, you can't attack them. You can't do anything to them. It's just really interesting. So someone like that is a perfect protector. You go down the street, wait 5 minutes, there's going to be a car accident. Now go, So it's really interesting, that whole concept. I thought it's interesting that they describe it that way. And then Paul I think it's 1 Corinthians, talks about tongues and prophecy being put together. So let's see here. Today's Jerusalem Day, celebrating the end of day 6 when they took Jerusalem. Okay, cool. All right. Well, that concludes our chat room stuff here. So hopefully this was good and it was very crisp and clear and we were able to do lots of things. I'll turn that off. That never did go off, I guess. Okay, we'll go ahead and end tonight, 8 o'clock. Well, 8:08, so I did pretty good. So Thursday we'll be back with a Q&A, and hopefully this will continue to work really well. And we'll see you Thursday. So God bless. Have a safe week.